joining me again. We're outside today and the weather has appropriately become rather fickle. So it started off as nice and bright and sunny when I left the house and walked to here, and now it's miserable and windy and it's going to rain. That's February. But that's appropriate, as is this hollow tree, the reason why I've come out here, and I will tell you in a minute why that's appropriate. But because it's windy out here and it's blustery and you're probably struggling to hear me, I'm going to go inside the tree. So come with me inside the tree.
That's better. I hope you can hear me a bit better now. The reason we're inside this rather majestic hollow oak tree, which is quite close to where I live, is that a couple of weeks ago I noticed that some of the people that I follow on Instagram who are folklore artists are doing a thing called Faebruary, where they're doing drawings of fairies throughout this month. I thought that's interesting. As a hobby community, we've had October for a while. Some people do November, there's December. Some people are doing Slanuary, so I thought, oh, that's good, let's do Faebruary. We've got Fae in our range, so we're doing Faebruary. So with every order of £10 or more in our store this month, we're giving away a free Fae model. But I thought I'd take this opportunity to do another Woods origin myth and talk a little bit about the Fae. Because not that many fantasy wargaming systems have Fae in. You'd probably be more familiar with the fantasy convention of elves. Of course, they come traditionally in three types: high elves, wood elves, and dark elves. And I guess they're not too dissimilar from the Fae. They are tall, elegant beings. They're a little bit magical, a little bit tricksy. They've got pointy ears. So they're not that dissimilar. And the fantasy elves very much take their basis from Tolkien. You've only got to look at those three types: dark elves, wood elves, and high elves. Tolkien has all of those. They're not quite the same. In Tolkien, the dark elves are not evil elves. They're just elves that didn't travel across the sea, didn't see the lamps of the Valar, so they're dark as opposed to light. And of course, the wood elves are typified by Legolas and Thranduil, and the wood-dwelling elves, perhaps even more so than the elves of Lorien, although typically they live in woods, so they're wood elves too. One of the major influences of Tolkien was Beowulf, the epic Anglo-Saxon poem. And if you haven't come across Tolkien's own interpretation, translation of Beowulf, that's worth checking out. That came out not that many years ago. Do go and have a look for it. And Beowulf, although it's a piece of Anglo-Saxon poetry, it's set and very much draws on Norse culture, and the elves very much come from that setting. The elves in Norse folklore are a kind of companion to the Vanir, the godly pantheon of the Norse, and it's not specified that they are gods, but they are certainly godlike, and they have magical properties. And the word elf comes possibly from a Norse root, which means white or shining, so the shining ones, the bright ones. But it also possibly comes from the German Alp, and that means nightmare. And I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that it comes from both, because elves, typically when we think of them in Tolkien, we think of them as these noble, proud beings. They're the kind of ultimate goodies, if you like. And we leave aside the fact that they're not really all that nice. They're because they come from outside of Middle Earth, both in Norse and Tolkien. They're not really all that interested in the doings of men. A few of them are trying to help to defeat the darkness, but ultimately they can escape into the west and get out of the way. So they're not that interested, not that bothered. They're pretty racist towards men and dwarves. Sometimes you can see how the dwarves of Thorin's company are treated, and you can say, okay, well that's because of they'd unleashed dragons and balrogs and things. That's why the elves don't like them. But there's definitely a snobbery and a pride there. So they're not all nice. And in Norse, they're capable of doing some pretty awful things as well. But elves are, as I say, they're from a Norse Germanic root, and in the kind of Germanic Anglo-Saxon tradition, of course, they are representative of a whole spectrum of what we might call fairies now. Pixies, sprites, typically mind spirits, that kind of thing. They're all blanketed under elves, and they can be really little things, or they can be tall human things that Tolkien has in his writing. But the woods, although it brings in aspects of Norse and Anglo-Saxon, is kind of more rooted on the other side of the country, if you will, with the Celtic peoples, who come from quite a different lineage. And so the Fae take most of their origins from the Tuatha De Danann, who are the kind of Irish. Again, they're not really gods. They have kind of godlike powers. They're often treated as kind of the Irish pantheon, but they're not really gods. And they feature in the Book of Invasions, which is an amalgamation from different sources. And they come into Ireland and they displace the Firbolg, who are the original dwellers there, and then they in turn are displaced by the Milesians later on. And the Book of Invasions is a kind of pseudo historical account of the settlement of Ireland. Some people have seen that it's in three stages. So you've got the Firbolg, the Tuatha De Danann, and the Milesians, and they kind of have the same adventures. They have the same battles. They very much echo each other, even though they've displaced them. Some people see that as the Tuatha De Danann is the kind of spiritual battle that happens over Ireland. The Milesians are the very physical, real people who inhabit Ireland. And the Firbolg are these kind of primeval spirits that are still lingering on the island from previous times. And there's something to be said in that. And the Tuatha De Danann specifically, when they their battles are with the people called the Fomorians, who we've kind of amalgamated into the Mieri. They draw on other culture as well, but the Mieri had sort of draw from the Fomorians, so they're kind of ancient enemy. And that was really the starting point for the Fae in the woods. They're this antithesis to the Mieri, who look foul but are fair, and the Fae are looking fair but totally rotten inside. So you've got that Shakespearean fair is foul, foul is fair dichotomy going on. Now the Tuatha De Danann in the Book of Invasions, as I said, they get displaced by the Milesians. And the Milesians are Gaelic people that come from Iberia. So you've got that kind of Celtic influx. And they don't completely oust the Tuatha De Danann or kill them. What they do is they come to an agreement which drives the Tuatha De Danann underground into these mounds and tunnels. And these mounds and tunnels, these are called the Sidhe, 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 and that has become a word that is associated with fairies. So you talk about, for example, the Banshee is a female spirit, the Beanshee, I'm going to say that wrong because it's an Irish word and I don't speak Irish Gaelic, which is sad because I really should. But yeah, Beanshee, the female wailing spirit. So from the dwelling place Sidhe, they get their names. But this is where they also start being known as the fairy folk and the fae folk and the fair folk, and start broadening out in myth. Although the Tuatha De Danann are this very specific, they're kind of demi-human, godlike race. From that point in which they go into this underground, the myths sort of start to grow up around them, and they develop into a very mixed bag of fairies. So you've got big fairies and little fairies, and the so-called trooping fairies, which are the human-sized fairies who still come through into the mortal realm from time to time and troop with their raids through the land. And it's those that are the Fae specifically. And from these dwelling places underground in mounds and in tunnels, they developed this idea of Anwen, or Anun or Anthen. It's called different things in different places, but Anun is the Welsh, and this is the sense of an other world. I think it means other place. Probably, we don't know for sure, but it probably means other place. And sometimes this is underground and is reachable by cairns and barrows and hollow trees, which is why we're inside one. Hollow trees and hollow oak trees specifically are said to be gateways to Anun, and obviously that's very much a part of the way that Fae work in the woods. But there's also a sense that Anun is it's another place. It's often described as an island, and that you can go there, you can travel across the sea to it. And sometimes this is held that because this is Welsh writers writing about Anun as an island, it's held that is Ireland over the sea from Wales. But also there's a sense that it's much further west. It's in the sea somewhere to the west of Ireland, and if you sail there, you can get to the other realm, which is the realm of Faery, where things live. And sea and void are quite close things, so we've taken that as a sort of otherworldly crossing. But in lots of cultures, the idea of gulfs of sea are they're uncrossable stretches of void. It's seen as a kind of metaphor for the thing that you can't really reach across. And we obviously have the same thing. We have Anlin, which is where the Fae live. Now, you may have seen some of these trooping fairies in cultural references. Obviously, the kind of Welsh mythic culture has been underground, as it were, but it hasn't gone away, and it's surfaced in a few forms. The most notable of which is the King Arthur stories, very much rooted in Welsh Celtic folklore. And in there, of course, you've got Morgan le Fay, or Morgiana le Fay, or Morgana le Fay, or however you want to say it, who represents these kind of ancient powers, and the Sam Neill Merlin film does that very well. You've got Merlin and Morgana as kind of this ancient pre-Christian force, which is, they're taking different views. So Merlin is sort of acknowledging that things are moving forwards, that Christianity is taking hold and chivalry is developing, and that's the way of the future, and he has to enable that to happen. Whereas Morgana is trying to hold things back and keep things with the old ways and claw back the old ways. So there's a bit of a feud with the Fae there, and Merlin is also held to be an elf or a kind of Fae influence. That's where he gets his magical powers. And in fact, if we go back to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, Gandalf, the second part, Alf, of his name comes from the same root as elf. It's the sense that he's got those kind of wizardly powers, and is also a consort of the the Valar in Tolkien, not the Vanir, but yeah, same principle holds. But you'd find it in more surprising cultures as well. So I remember watching an episode of the Smurfs where there are some fairies that gallop out of an oak tree. There you go. So it's still lingering. This idea that hollow trees are places where the fair folk can be encountered and live. Now, I don't think there are any fairies living in this tree. I haven't seen any. Well, I've been in a few small dogs, but no fairies. But if you would like to learn a bit more about fairies, there are a huge stack of resources, and I will list some in the comments that I've found helpful. But it's a really fascinating subject to look into. Now, of course, fantasy settings, I believe, can't just be purely drawn straight from mythology. To make them interesting, you've got to mash them up a little bit. So what I've done is take this idea of the Fae from the Book of Invasions as being this force that comes in and then it withdraws again, and that's the basis. And because I wanted very much to have a Dark Age setting, I've looked at what's the power that sweeps in and then sweeps out, resulting in the Dark Ages. Well, of course, it's the Roman Empire. So my Fae are very much drawing on kind of Roman but also later Italian feels, so that the Fae Marshal have the kind of Roman crests on their armour, and then the Fae nobles have this kind of Venetian look to them. And part of the idea of that was that I wanted the Fae to be this very advanced, very other culture, so drawing on a later time period to make them really look at odds to the very kind of primitive Dark Age races that are surrounding them in the woods. And of course, we now know that Dark Ages is a bit of a misnomer, but it's a fantasy setting, so we don't have to worry too much about the historicity of it. Though it's quite nice to draw on that and nod to that. Part of the reason, I must confess, for drawing on Venetian influences for the Faeryland was that I really wanted to evoke that scene in Labyrinth, the kind of the masked ball with all the gowns and things. That kind of opulent, decadent culture really says Fae to me. So I wanted to get that in there. Anyway, that's a bit of a waffle about the origin and the nature of the Fae in the woods. I hope that's been interesting to you. I hope the wind hasn't been too awful for you. And next week will be 1 year since I started recording videos, which is a bit scary. So join me there for a 1 year birthday special. I will see you then. Take care.